Welcome to Brown Girl Book Club. I'm Leslie Murray, and today I'm interviewing Bushra Rahman, who is an award-winning novelist, and an engaging storyteller whose readings and lectures are suffused with humor and wisdom about the particular joys and contradictions of being a woman of color, a feminist, and a Muslim America in post 9/11 America. She's the editor of Colonize This, Young Women of Color, on Today's Feminism, a poetry collections, Mariana's Beauty Salon, and the short story collection Corona. Roses in the Mouth of a Lion is her first novel. Welcome to Brown Girl.
Thank you. And I'm already enjoying this pre-interview. I'm trying to not laugh too hard, but yes, thank you so much for inviting me. I love following the authors that you post, so thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Tell us about what is Roses in the Mouth of a Lion all about?
Well, okay, a tiny bit of what it's about because so much to cover in a little question, but basically it's about a Muslim girl growing up in a tight-knit Pakistani community in Corona, Queens, which is an immigrant neighborhood with first and second generation refugee people from everywhere around the world. And so she's growing up in this environment, and she's very spiritual, she's very smart, and she starts to discover her budding queer identity. And then it's about her trying to figure that out because it's also the 80s. And in the 80s, it was very different. Even the big, most famous people were in the closet. George Michael, who's like a big part of the book. I'll even say Whitney Houston on set it. Just like there's a lot of people who just like their sexualities had to be very closeted, so she doesn't even have this kind of any models in pop culture or in literature or anywhere really, until she goes to the Strand bookstore as a teenager and starts to find some of those literary references to gay culture and starts to and meets another queer teenager, and but that's kind of what the book is about. One of the things the book is about.
And tell us about the title because it's so unique. When I saw the title, I was like, this person is a poet, right? Because only poets come up with such creativity.
Well, and the random comma after
Yeah.
no reason.
Like, wait, what's going on?
I really wanted the title to be something originally Corona because the book takes place in Corona, Queens. But then, the pandemic stole that title from me, along with much else, people, places, everything in my life. And so I couldn't name it that, and I was just walking in the woods, and it came to me just rose mouth lion, and I kind of had as a working title for a long time, and I didn't understand it. And as a poet, I just accepted the words. That's what us poets do. It's like, okay, I'll write it down. I don't know what it means. Maybe somebody else will tell me. And in these conversations with people, I've started to realize that what it really is that Razia, the main character, is like a rose in the mouth of a lion. She's beautiful, she's thorny, and she's living in this very, in a dangerous kind of way, but she doesn't even realize it, whether it's by living in the city in the 80s or, what will possibly happen to her as a queer person, but she's, so in that way that metaphor kind of captures the constant beauty and danger of what her life is like.
Yeah. Oh, I like that.
I'm still figuring it out. I'm still trying to figure it out.
It reminded me, this is like one of my questions, because when I was reading it, you made Queens, Corona to be exact, to be this lush urban paradise, right? With your lyrical prose and your descriptions of nature. And this allows for the adult reader to fully commit to Razia and her friends' adventures without feeling like, oh my God, pending violence is coming. These girls should be safe at home. Like, how did you do that? Why did you do that?
Well, for so many years, and one of my favorite jobs was I used to work through Teachers and Writers Collaborative and Urban Word NYC. So I just worked with kids and youth writing poetry in all the New York City public schools and after school programs. So one of the poems we always did was Willie Perdomo's version of Where I'm From, that poem in which he writes about a neighborhood. And even though, as an adult, you can know that this neighborhood is a possibly under-resourced neighborhood, and people are struggling, like the way that he makes that come to life with his descriptions, his sensory descriptions. So I was always doing that with children. And one day I wrote with them and I was like, I'll write about my neighborhood, Corona. And I started, and so a poem came to me, and that poem was really how the book began. The opening paragraph was my poem that I wrote with the kids. And I just think that their poetry and writing has a way of taking something ugly, traumatic, and horrible, and through language, transforming the experience of it, But it's healing for me to write about certain things in beautiful language. Like something inside of me changes.
Okay, so reading your novel reminded me of my favorite episodic novel, A House on Mango Street, right?
Oh,
By
yes.
Sandra Cisneros. And like, and the House of Mango Street is so unique, but because you can read it at any age, right? And get something to it. And it doesn't fit into any category of this is YA, this is adult fiction, this is this, right? And in your novel, you were able to break that mold as well, right? Because you can give this to a teenager and they can read it. But when they get older, they can read it and get something completely different. And how were you able to just capture all of that?
Well, I love House on Mango Street, and I am like the character Razia, like a reader, deep reader. She's always going to the library, always reading, and so I absorbed literature like House on Mango Street, literature on like A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. What's interesting is I think that these designations of like what is YA and what is adult, those are marketing tools, and unfortunately they put people in boxes. But you and I know that we would read books when we were really young, so we probably shouldn't have been. But you just read whatever, everything. There's no like, oh, this is for children, this is for adults. Like you read it, you get what you can as a kid, and then as an adult, you get more or something different. And so this was always meant to be a book that can be read by everybody.
Absolutely. I think, like your book and like A House on Mango Street, for me, it's such a joy to read because I have these two deep feelings at once, right? It's like the childscape, like the youthscape of like, oh my God, you're going through this experience. I went through that. So, and you can relive your moment, but also it's the adultscape of like, who is she going to be, right? And you have these two strong feelings. And this is why, like, I texted you, I sent you a message. I was like, this is so cute. I love it, because it makes you feel good. Especially like this book is dealing with so many like heavy topics, right? But essentially, you feel good. You feel good to be in community with Razia and her all the women when they're sitting down and they're reading the Quran and they're eating. You feel good to like just go on adventures with them, and I want that feeling more in literature.
It's about, I think you had written to me also, it's the friendships, right? And like our friends who help us survive everything. I mean, we use the word community, but also like communities are built up of friendships, friendships and partnerships and situationships and all those things, and like I really have been lucky in that, my parents are immigrants, and for them, their friend circle was a survival mechanism, They didn't have any other family here. Their families couldn't get visas to come here. South Asians were banned from this country until the late 60s. And even then, like my dad could come, but his brothers couldn't come. His sisters couldn't come, So his brothers and sisters became the other Pakistani people who lived in the building of Brooklyn where they first lived, and then in that neighborhood in Queens where they moved to. And they're still their, like, they're still their friends, those who are still with us in this world. Like, they still are a community, the same people they met in a building in Brooklyn in 1970,
Yeah.
because, and so I think for Razia too, like, that her friendships are really fun and silly. And I loved writing that dialogue. I feel like people can remember their friends who were like Razia's friends, right? Everyone's got that, like, friend who's into this and friend who's into that and friend who hates school and friend who loves school and, you know, friend who doesn't take anything seriously. So she has all those friends.
So when reading your book, I cannot help but think about my students at the Asian University for Women, which is in Bangladesh, right? Where I taught for 1 year, and the majority of them are Muslim, and so many of their experiences were like Razia's, but Razia is in Queens, in Corona, and they're in like Bangladesh, and I was just like, and it made me think about like the universal theme of coming of age, right? Because these were like, freshmen, women at the university. But also it made me think about like the uniqueness of what does it mean to come of age as a Muslim woman, right? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And, it makes total sense to me that you felt that way, because the spiritual practices are almost probably identical. And, one thing that I wanted to put in this book was Razia's spiritual practice. So you see her doing the wuzu, you see her pray, you see her reading namaz, you see her reading Quran, you hear the languages, you see the Quran Khanis, which are gatherings where people like all will just finish a Quran in one sitting. And I think that, that's something that's not very much in Western literature, but it's something that if you are a practicing Muslim person, this is your life. You're praying 5 or more times a day. You're gathering on the weekends, everything is about prayer and religion and constant remembrance of God. And, I think for me, honestly, writing this book got me, I think the combination between the deep griefs I experienced in the pandemic of losing just so many close people in my life, and then writing this book and the spiritual practice, like, I feel like I kind of just rediscovered my own spiritual core, because I was like, oh, I used to love talking to Allah. I used to love doing these things. I used to love, and so, like, I really think like it came to it with a real love. Like, I was writing about the spiritual practice with a lot of love and respect. And I'm really happy that the response has been that these are Muslim characters who are nuanced, because you could just imagine that if you're writing about a gay Muslim person, like, where that could possibly go in a very stereotypical way. And I didn't want it to go there. You understand all the Muslim characters and all their different life choices. And yeah, no, I think that probably me and the women that you taught in Bangladesh did a lot of things. Our lives are really not that different, for a while.
And I love that connection though, because it teaches us like, we're very the same but different, right? But also I think like, which is it so important to your book, is that Razia loves being a Muslim. She loves practicing. She loves reading the Quran. She loves getting together with her community, and she's not rejecting it, right? We see so many of these like novels when speaking about someone who is living, first gen, there's this like outright rejection, right? And I want to be American.
Right. I did not. This is not that book. I was really just not wanting to write that book.
When you were talking, it just reminded me of how, like, when we talk about someone who's queer and Muslim, we think that's like in direct, contradiction, right? But if you're queer and Christian, it's okay. And like, but I've lived in like Muslim majority countries, and I visited it, and there's a queer life. There's a big queer scene.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Happening. And I just love that also her coming to her queer identity is not a rejection of all that she is.
I am putting forth this message because I feel it strongly. And I think that, and I'm not surprised that there are these communities because the religion is very homosocial. I mean, come on, if you're going to be like putting men and men together and women together, how is there not going to be like feelings? And also like my definition of what intimacy and queerness is, it's not literally just about a sexual act. It's about who we want to build life with. Who do you want to spend your time with? Who do you want to live with? Who do you want to raise your family with, And I'm lucky in that I grew up in New York City, and in the 90s there was an enormous South Asian, Muslim, BIPOC queer POC scene. We were not we had each other. And again, these are still my friends. They're still my people. And we're like, well, we've been doing this for decades now. And I just think that there's a way that there are, to find those communities of color who are queer was absolutely essential for me, absolutely essential. And I think I highly recommend that to anyone who is a BIPOC person, to find like those BIPOC queer communities if you haven't already, because it's just a different kind of homecoming. I really think it is. And I didn't realize that I was experiencing something so that was, not going to be forever, that kind of living.
When I was thinking while you were talking and I was thinking about the book, I think so much of all of the book, it's not, I'm trying to think. It's not explaining to it's not acquiescing to the white gaze, right? So it's not explaining like, oh, these women are no longer in the margin because they have community, or like, look at us, like, Muslim Pakistani women with humanity. It is what it is. And I love that you are not writing for the white gaze. Like, there's certain things in the book that you just have to go on Google and be like, okay, that's what it means, right?
Yeah.
And like, how did you like not want to translate these people to fit to feel palatable for the mass audience?
Well, I mean, I don't live for the white gaze, for one thing. So it's like my whole life, it's really my whole way of being. And you have to constantly be aware of that and check yourself and not do that. And so first of all, it's a way of being in the world. And I did want to make the book be that experience, because when I read a book by another South Asian writer and they start to explain something, I'm like, oh, well, they're not writing for me, And it's like, when will a book be written for me? and so it was so important for me to make this be a book that like another, Pakistani girl could find, like Razia could find in the library and be like, this is for me, And I do have, nieces who read the book, and whether or not their parents want them to, and, are like, my God, this really is a Muslim book. Like, it's finally like a real Muslim book, because you're like, it does feel like that. It does. And so I have to always remember who I'm writing for, which is like people like my nieces, who don't have books written for them, who are always trying to find reflections of themselves, and what, Daisy and I try to do in Colonize This, and what I try to do in all my writing and cultural activism, is like to put more authentic, complex portrayals of us out there for us, but when you go so deep into a human experience, anyone can relate to it.
It's like, what 2 takeaways you would like people to know about your book?
I would like a person who is Muslim and gay to know that they are loved, that they are fine, they are right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And to be a good friend, and to make friendships, and to like treat friendship like a survival. Like, it's like when they say, do or die friends, like all your friends have to be do or die friends, in order to live this lifestyle. And, and how much, and just like the joys of living your own path. Like, I don't want to spoil the book of like what happens at the end, but just to know that if you leap into your true self, you know, there will be a net that's there, because we've always existed, you know.
I am so like happy to interview you. Like, thank you for joining me. Like, you've been a friend in my head. Like, especially like
Oh.
reading the book, I was like, she cool, she cool, she cool. So I'm just like beyond pleased of like everything that you're doing, and I love your politics, and I love that what you are putting out in the world and your intentions. And so thank you so much for joining me and talking about this beautiful book that I don't really want to finish. Like, I'm
Oh.